much.
So we'll be passing the mic around so that the people who are streaming online can hear it. If you have a question, we'll get that around. Thanks.
So while we wait for our other associate teacher and anyone else who's wondering, especially because we have some new people, I'll just explain what we do now. This is a time for Dharma discussion, Dharma questions, and so it's really your turn to be brave and ask your questions. All questions are welcome. And pretty much anything that's going on in your life can be brought to the Dharma, or some might say, is the Dharma. Dharma's just the truth that holds us back from suffering. So do we know where Bill is? Oh, he might be doing something with the heat, since he helps at times build things and figure things out. So let's go ahead and begin. Anybody have any kind of question? And Cynthia will bring you the microphone. Everything's perfectly clear, huh?
It would help with the sun, the wonderful sun, if you raise your hand high, and then it helps me see through the bright sun.
Yeah, what happened to our curtain? We had one. Oh, not if you're sitting down here, Phil. It's like pretty intense on them. Yeah, a nice thin curtain. It's not going to be shutting out the sun, but it will help these people not have a headache. Okay.
Okay. I just find it really interesting from what my understanding of the Buddhist teachings, that intention seems to be such like a force of its own. Like a lot of times we think that from how I was brought up, which it wasn't in that tradition, that intention doesn't really matter. It's just like what you do, like if you're doing the same thing, then it doesn't matter as much what the intention is. But it seems like the intention is such a huge part in carrying that intention and how that interacts with karma. So I guess that was my, not so much a question, but wanting to get clarification on why that might be, or what was beneficial about that, to think about that.
So I want to get the question clearer. Are you saying that somewhere you learned that intention is less important than action? I'm not clear. I'm not clear the first thought.
That would be from before I entered Buddhist teachings. More from American, how I was brought up, and maybe my family's perspective. Intention wasn't such an important thing. You didn't ask a person what their intention was behind what they did. You just saw what they did, and
you just looked at what they did. They'd say, I don't care what your intention was. It still came. You did that. Yeah. Okay. So that's the kind of, a cultural way of looking at it. Right. And then what's the question?
I guess my question is, what's the benefit, what do you see as far as the benefits of that shift? And also whether it's not just not just a shift in viewpoint, but actually a different sense of cosmology, as far as that if like with karma, that intention really is its own force.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So karma is action, but we can get confused that we think it's only physical action. Karma is action of mind, speech, body. So the intention's the mind, connected to the mind. So everything we think, do, or say sets things in motion. And so intention is fundamental. The Buddha, one of the first teachings was the mind is the precursor of everything. There's nothing that occurs without the mind. So look at this place. Someone had to think of it, have an idea, then have an intention, many moments of intention to build it. The building comes into the present moment, which it's also going out of the present moment because everything's impermanent. This building's already falling apart, sorry. It's already disintegrating. I say that to Bill because he's worked so hard on it. But just as kind of a joke. But intention is one of the factors in the mind, and it's incredibly important. In fact, from a Buddhist point of view, the same action, it's the opposite of, as you pointed out, the average point of view, or the worldly point of view, that you could be doing the same action, but with a pure motivation or intention, that action could lead to no suffering, or the action could lead to a lot of suffering. Does that get it?
Yeah, I guess that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, it's a good question. Want to add anything? 1 second, but I want to hear from you for sure. Yeah. Over here.
One piece of the picture is what's the impact on us if we cultivate devious intention and carry out activities that are apparently good. We train our mind in deceit. And we can go the other way. We can say, well, we could try to train our minds in beneficial outlook, helpful view, and still make mistakes about what we do. And that's very easy to imagine. Most of us, I think, have had lots of experience with that. But it trains our mind in a different way, and the outcome of that is not measured solely in the outcome of the particular action that we did at that moment, but in terms of the long term. And it's if we retain some humility about our motivation, the connection between our motivation and our action, then we may learn something from the fact that our action did not seem to turn out the way we wanted it to. So we can then do something about that.
My question was just about a clarification of something you just said about how the same action can result in no suffering or can result in a lot of suffering. And I just wanted to understand if you meant a lot of suffering or no suffering for yourself, or a lot of suffering or no suffering for others.
Well, it could be both, because the reality is that we're so interdependent. When I move from a suffering place in my mind, it's almost like ripples go out. The ones closest to me may be affected first. Like maybe I'm just grumpy or judgmental, and you're around someone you really care about, you can feel that. They don't even have to say anything. The way the body moves, we read 70%, they say, from nonverbal. So, and then it goes out. We can't even trace. Then maybe your partner gets in a grumpy mood from contacting you all day and then goes out and spreads it around, right? So suffering is suffering, and we're so interdependent that we're pretty much sharing it all the time. That's the thing is that's the downside. The upside is we have the potential to end it and share that all the time. We have the potential to realize our compassionate, loving Buddha nature and share that at all times. But the work is in the mind heart. So I affect you without even, I'm affecting you right now, and you're affecting me. And but the work is when I sit down, I need to work here, so that whatever I bring to the party, as my friend says, whatever you bring to the party, you hopefully bring non-suffering, joyous, clarity, whatever you want to call it. That help. And what's your name again? Ping? Yeah, welcome.
Hi, I'm Addie. I can't really see anybody, but your silhouettes are beautiful. I guess I had a couple questions. I was reflecting on how important it is to have Sangha. I'm here sometimes, but I also enjoy a lot of solitude after, I'm a full-time student, and those times of just being alone are really precious to me, and I often do that, and it feeds me. Anyway, I guess my questions are about like discernment. It's been quite the year for all of us, and I think last night I was reflecting on discerning between knowing that I'm in my own experience, and I have my Tonglen practice, and I have whatever guided meditations I can find to help me. But it was actually, I was needing to just call a friend and talk,
Yeah.
And I guess the discernment between knowing like it's okay to be in solitude or sit in nature and just feel that versus needing to physically be in Sangha when things are really hard. And yeah, just sitting with the groundlessness and also knowing when it's, when humans are good medicine. So.
When you are at that crossroads, which I'm going to say, and you correct me, it sounds like being in solitude, doing your practice, studying as you need to, and then some confusion about when to come out of that.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, like just a brief example is, just on a global level, it was kind of a challenging week for me. And then also I have a couple friends in Southern California, and I have one friend who's house
fires
burned to the ground, and and I feel like I've been holding a lot of space for people this year, and also needing it too. And sometimes it can kind of creep up on me how much effort I'm putting into just maintaining baseline and saying SOS.
Yeah. Yeah, for me that question goes to compassion for self. So we were just working the last 2 days in the Tonglen retreat about start with yourself. So when you sit in Tonglen on the cushion, picture your own suffering and wish it to be gone, and fill yourself with that Buddha loving light or all your goodness, etc. So for me, when I lose the compassion for this everyday self, then I push myself too hard to help everyone. And then it collapses. It's kind of good, it collapses on its own. The way it collapses is either exhaustion or irritation or sense of, I'm not happy, So I just look for those signals within myself. Okay, time to go be with a friend, time to go have fun, time to cry on someone's shoulder, time to come to a whole group. And that's going to be so different for all of us. Some of us are more introvert on that continuum, some are more extrovert, some of us go flipping, flopping. So, within each of us, it's our own garden. And it sounds like, to me, just by you asking the question, you're noticing. And that's the key to the healthy place, to the decisions that will help you end your suffering and help others. For me, I have to watch out, and it's getting much better, watch out for a big helper person. And I don't know that that's for you at all, but the big helper, savior of the world. And there's a certain disconnect in that, even though there's a big heart in it, a big compassionate heart in it. The disconnect that I've experienced is I'm rising above those suffering masses. They're here, and I'm here, and I'm going to save them. And that's a disconnect, as in I'm not seeing my complete interconnectedness with them. No difference. They suffer, I suffer. I want free, they want free. We're far more alike than we are different. So that helps me with that crossroads. And then I fall in one ditch and fall in the other. But that's how we get out of the ditch. We have to fall in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question that came up after the 2 days of Tonglen teaching. And I guess it's because in Lama Michael's book, he said no matter how short the time, start with the refuge in bodhicitta and end with a dedication. But I was also noticing in your teaching and when I was home that there are those times, I think, Bill, you quoted Pema Chodron and said flash on something. So there are those flashes, but they arise. I'm already in the middle of the practice. I didn't take my refuge. So and there can be a chance to dedicate after that awareness of exchanging self with other or another Tonglen practice, but I just kind of go, oops, I blow through the gate and I start in the middle with a flash on something. And it seems like it's not harmful, but I'm also missing an instruction.
Yeah. The instruction for that, the sequence for the practice is really an instruction for a sequence of formal practice. So that's when we just there on the spot notice something and we engage in whatever practice it is, whether it's examining how experience arises, relating to the suffering arising in us, relating to suffering arising in others, confusion, whatever it is, if it just arises in the moment, you could say, it's arising in part because of the momentum, the karmic imprint, if you will, of having generated the wish for the freedom of beings. It has arisen because we have turned our mind towards refuge. So that's a general context, and then it arises out of that. But the more clear we are in that throughout our life, that sense of taking refuge, the sense of turning the mind towards awakening for the benefit of beings, the more it's there, then the clearer the practice will be coming up in the middle of that, just on the spot. And the more that we have the sense of letting go of it and not holding on to it as our kind of personal territory at the end, then there's a natural dedication to it. But when we need to also take the time to create the imprint for those outlooks so that they become part of our stream of being.
Yeah, one way I deal with this is I think of the whole day like bookended. So in the morning, practice, take refuge. In essence, try to carry it all day without trying, but okay, I'm embedded in it now. I'm with Buddha, Dharma, Sangha all day. Of course I forget, but then I remember. And then at the end of the day, at your practices, dedicate everything from the whole day. And you can also dedicate from anything you've ever done. Like sometimes I come on to some picture or something and I go, oh yeah, I remember that retreat. I'm going to dedicate it again. That was so wonderful. I dedicate everything that was created in that retreat. These are not solid and finite, so we can play with it. It's just as Bill just said this morning, it's the imprint in our mind that we're working on. We're training the mind. We're not trying to fulfill any certain formal anything. If the formal stuff doesn't train your mind, don't do it, you know. If something rises spontaneously, cherish it, dedicate it, be happy. Yeah. So we eventually come to live in it. I'm not saying this is my experience, I hope for it, but we eventually come to live in refuge all the time. Don't really have to do the prayer, but say it to remind ourselves. You can tell some of these folks that if you've seen Kempo Lodro Donyo, I doubt that he has to remind himself over and over, I got to take refuge. He's living in it. He is it. He becomes a refuge. He becomes a refuge for us. So that's what happens as it moves. Yeah.
Thank you both for your way of clarifying.
Thanks for the question.
I'm thinking also going back, now I've forgotten your name already. Addie. To go back to your question as well, both of these have a little bit of a flavor of there's a way I should do it. Yeah. And or maybe a better way that I should do it. And that perhaps part of your pondering is, well, the practice in solitude, there are many examples of that as being a kind of a supreme practice and being able to do that. But it's not always the right thing. And so being able to find the right thing in the moment and to understand that is part of the path along the way. So a kind of gentleness can come in there. And we do Michael once pointed out the rather obvious thing, saying, we're always doing our best. It's like, oh, well, it's a truism that seems very subtle. You're like, no, I feel like, oh, I didn't do my best. But my best at that point was not being able to do as well as I did this other time, but it was my best. And so if we have that sort of relationship to it, whatever we're doing will have a little bit more opportunity to flower in its own way. And so whether it's calling a friend or just a practice just arising in the moment, whatever it is, it'll have a little bit more space and fertile place for it to grow.
I said I think it snuck up on me, the contrast of what normally feels good. I just, all of a sudden, something else was needed. I think it just took me by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks. Yeah.
This is so much like Cynthia's question that I just thought I'd throw in together, because hers was not being able to do the refuge first, but mine is at night. I often try and squeeze in a last meditation session while I'm in bed, and then almost routinely I'll fall asleep before dedication comes along. So and then you're like, okay, one time, that's just life. And then you're like, no, this is like a kind of a frequent pattern. I don't know if I'm supposed to dedicate when I first wake up in the morning, or just whether I'm just glad that I'm doing what I can when I can.
Yeah, well, you are doing your best. And that's so important, because we need to contradict the constant, most of us have a habit of criticizing ourselves and pushing ourselves, focusing more on I didn't do that and should have, and so just that basis. But I've taken to what occurred to me right away was, well, dedicate when you wake up. I dedicate my sleep now. I dedicate my shower. I dedicate I go watch my grandkids, and when I leave their house, I'm in a new habit of, I dedicate all of that to the end of suffering of them and all beings. You can dedicate all day and take refuge all day. There's no reason not to. These are good things, Of course, they're tainted with our attachment and our aversion, but, So I thought, well, I would just wake up in the morning and say, I dedicate that. I dedicate dreams. I dedicate, it's just, again, we're training our mind. We're not doing, this isn't an activity out in the world, except it is. But it has effects, put it that way. Everything we do, thought, word, and action has effects. But in Buddhism, what we're doing is training this mind here. That's what we're doing. So do whatever trains it. So, I've noticed when I'm leaving a place, I have an old habit, which is disappearing, thank goodness, of kind of going over it like, meh, they did that, I did this, picking it over. So that nurtures the critical mind, and it nurtures the self-centered critical mind, all spinning around. Me, I, mine. I wanted this, I didn't get that, they did that to me, So getting away from it, just step out of the house and say, hey, I dedicate that whole thing to the end of their suffering and mine. And all beings, all grandparents, and then I feel happier. Maybe I'm just totally self-centered, but I feel happier. So, it's really about, Buddhism's about coming to our it's a funny word, but I'm going to use it, our inherent joy, what we have inherited. We have this Buddha nature, so we might as well enjoy it, nurture it, not go, didn't do the right thing today. Yeah. You see, right, what the possibilities, and there's far more possibilities. But we can get very creative. Not that we're moving away from the traditional teachings, we need to know those, but we can get creative and play with them to make them work with our way of being. For some, that'll be more playful. For some, it'll be more serious. Different times, it'll be whatever. Just so we're really grounded in that Buddhist worldview, if you want to be a Buddhist. So Miriam, who's got the mic? Oh, Diane, and then Miriam. Diane.
I just had a quick comment. I just read something by Pema Chodron in which she encourages us to rejoice in any little thing we do and remembering just the tiniest little measure.
Yeah.
And that moves us from a critical attitude
Yes.
toward an appreciation of where we're going on the path. And I found that really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'll follow from that and go back to sleep. Not exactly literally, but
Oh, sleep. The activity of
yes,
sleep.
the activity of falling asleep. But that practice that you just mentioned, Diane, the practice of sympathetic joy, of noticing something positive and then enhancing that. So wherever we find something positive, to rejoice in that, that does have the impact of enhancing the positive quality of that and having it resonate. It's similar in a sense to dedicating, sort of a similar. But to go back to the piece about practicing when we fall asleep, you could say there is a very special condition in that, which is that falling asleep is an opportunity. We think of it, well, it's just lights out. But there is an opportunity to develop more awareness of that process. It's actually possible to fall asleep and not lose awareness. It's a very strange thing to say because we define generally falling asleep as loss of awareness. But the more that we can approach that moment of falling asleep in awareness, and there are a variety of particular formal practices that you can do in that, the more that we might have the opportunity to be present through all kinds of changes, kind of dramatic changes in our consciousness. And falling asleep, in the sense, it's you could say it's an opportunity to prepare for the kinds of changes that come at the time of death as well. So being able to, whatever practice that we're doing, if we can do it in a way where we can carry that through that moment of falling asleep, we have an opportunity there.
There's an amazing book on that called Dream Yoga by Andrew Holacek. It's, even you don't engage in the yoga, it's such a teaching reading that book about sleep, awareness, death. It's quite wonderful. There's also Tricycle Magazine has an online class that I took, and I think it's still there that you can register for, called Dream Yoga. It's wonderful if you're drawn to that kind of thing, which is a good thing. Yeah.
So I have to admit that my critical self got right up there when you were talking about, appreciating all these wonderful things that we were doing. Because and I don't know if it's a critical self or a part of me that recognizes that I can excuse a lot of bad behaviors by saying, my intent was good. And so I just wanted to remind myself, and perhaps all of you can discuss this as well, is that there are, for lack of a better word, moral teachings in Buddhism about right livelihood, right, there's that sort of thing. And also that when I get information that something that I did, no matter how well intended it was, resulted in harm to others, that I need to put that in my memory bank as part of my skillful means. Like, okay, that did not work in this situation. And so I need to look at that and see how I can adjust my behaviors in different situations. So I guess my immediate reaction was, okay, so I can use just about any behavior and say, I'm aware of it, therefore it's fine. I just
That's not true.
I know that's not true. I just wanted to make sure that.
And I did say that you have to look at your actions and see the results. And if you have the humility, you will see that my intention, though I had a good intention, it was not skillful in execution.
Right.
So I did say that.
I heard that from you, Bill.
Good. I just making sure that you didn't leap on to the excusing part. And no,
Yeah.
that's clearly not the teaching.
I hear you. I just what I'm reacting to is that a lot of other people from other religions and other perspectives might hear some of this, that Buddhism is about this, that, or the other thing, and say, oh, so you can just do anything, and then you can just say, oh, I dedicate it, and it's all fine. So I just wanted to clarify that.
But that's not what we said.
No.
So, yes, people can and will say all kinds of critical things about all kinds of religions based on selective readings and with the sole intent, starting out hearing with an attitude of hearing only what they can glean in order to make a case to undermine something. And we have to be careful about that too, thinking about other traditions and other perspectives, because that's not, it's not a good thing. It's not helpful. It's not just at the very basic level. It's just simply not accurate. There is a disjunction between our thought patterns and what's actually going on. So there's a bit of moral teaching in that. You need to try to accord with reality.
So the key for me about that, one key, I really thank you for the reminder about ethics as fine as the grain of sands, but the view is as wide as beyond space. So is when I become aware that I've done something with or without the intention to harm, but harm has resulted. My key right now is, so how do I react towards myself? If I react towards myself critical and you did wrong, it's just like with grandkids, it just doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't work to be so moralistic. It is important to guide and say, no, we don't yell all the time. No, we don't sit on the table. No, we share. No, we don't hit. But the tone with which you do that, the way you come forward in a friendly, loving way, then the person, and be persistent and patient, then the person reacts in a much better way. But if we throw our fear around or our angst around about they're doing the wrong thing, I'm doing the wrong thing, it's a suffering reaction. So just seeing that. Yeah, we pretty much, the world will show us when we're causing harm, if not immediately, eventually. And one key is, when I see that, how am I with myself? Am I compassionate towards myself or hard on myself? And what's the result of being hard on myself? Am I a good coach to myself would be another way to say it. How would I coach someone else about this?
That's a critical point. How do you actually use the moment to move to something? There is a way in which our ability to make moral judgments is oftentimes just a pure self-indulgence. I am inflating myself by my ability to judge that as wrong, and even judge myself as wrong. And my job is done now. No. It goes back to how well can you actually be a coach for yourself, and how effective can you be at benefiting others? What can you actually do? What can you actually learn? So that's a big distinction between our usual sense of a moral framework, where we just hold up the red flag or the green flag, and it's wrong or it's right, and again we're done with it, and the suffering will be inflicted later on by others. But if we really look at ourselves as agents in the middle of it, then a humility about that, and a care about how we actually use our ability to discriminate and to understand situations. It's a much bigger burden in a certain way. and one that has to be carried also very lightly and openly, otherwise it collapses and becomes kind of frozen and very difficult. So that the kind of gentleness in the middle of that is really critical.
My name's Lotus, by the way. Hello. Everything that you're talking about now about being like a gentle coach towards yourself. Thank you. I've been having a lot of trouble with turning away from suffering that I see because it's so overwhelming and like specifically things that are so far outside of my reach, it seems like. And like, I understand that I need to be kind and gentle with myself and it's okay if you can't handle it and try to go back to it. But I find like this overwhelming sense of fear that like no matter how much loving kindness I give to myself and I receive from people around me that care about me, it's still terrifying to try and go back and face it and know that actions I take might never reach these things that I care about and suffering that I see.
Right.
And Tonglen, it's helpful. In some ways it's healing, but in other ways it's still just the overwhelming sense of fear and this deep pit that I feel inside myself of things that are so far away and I don't know how to touch it.
Yeah. Let's just be quiet for a moment with your heart. Well, as I was reviewing this morning, life is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming situation that we're in. Here we are, humans. There's massive suffering. You don't have to look beyond your own self, but we do. And there's also this Buddha nature impulse to end the suffering. One Lama said to me, I asked him one time when I was pretty new to practice, I said, okay, so now I see the suffering, I'm freaking miserable and overwhelmed. And he said, oh, you're seeing it. I am so happy. So we even can take joy in that because there are people who don't see it. And when we don't see it, we go around making more. Okay, so the first thing is to notice that sense of care and love you are bringing to the world. You wish you could end it all, right? You wish you could end all the suffering. That's your Buddha nature. So that's one part. Then, as a human being, we need to be very, this was a hard lesson for me. I did like 30 or 35 years of social activism. And so I really learned a lot. And mostly I wasn't kind to myself during that time. I pushed myself really hard. I had I will call it now sort of a fantasy, although I don't want to denigrate anything I did, but I had a fantasy that I could be more powerful than I was. I could affect things in a much greater way than I could, and that I could do that through a lot of action, political action. And all of it was very well intentioned and motivated. anti-racism, anti-nuclear power, you know, working with women's rights and poor people and et cetera, et cetera. It was all quite good. But I didn't come from a compassionate spot. I got caught in the them, us, them, those bad people, and us good people, and we fight. And that continues the suffering. So thank goodness I ran into therapy and Buddhism and got larger views, and I think I have more effective ways to help change the world. So overwhelm's natural. It's good you're seeing it. The sadness is natural. Just be really gentle with yourself. Take good care of yourself, because you want to sustain your life over a long time to be effective. A long time. It's hard not to burn ourselves out when we have that deep, deep fire of care. You know, I'll throw myself into the fray, you know. I'll jump on the grenade. Sometime that might be the right thing to do, but you want to make sure you realize you're shortening your life, and it's pretty precious. So I think the fact that you're feeling this and facing this, and you mentioned the fear. For me, the fear's gone down with my coming more clear about my capacity, doing things with others, not alone, not trying to do more than is my share. It's hard to figure out my share, but you can figure it out. Taking good care of yourself, you know, in terms of your physical self, not overexpending, because the overwhelm comes from that. I want to save the world, I'll work my butt off. It's not going to help the world if the self suffers all the way through that. That was my hard lesson. I wish someone had told me that when I was 21. But I probably wouldn't have listened. So, and it's okay. I don't even know if I'm hitting on the point for you. But the fear is a result of biting off more than we could possibly chew. You know, come on back to what can I do today that's helpful to myself and others? What could I, and who will help me do this? Who will help me do this? You know, my friends, maybe a group. For me, it was always helpful to work in groups. Really hard to work on big issues without groups. And which is a sangha, you know, a worldly sangha. If you want to try and change something politically, do it with a good heart towards everyone. Try to not get caught in the us-them. That'll wear you out. And it also will be ineffective, because it just continues the us-them. They're on top. We're here. We're on top. Boop, boop, boop. On it goes. Spin the wheel. Fear and competition and all that. So try and work that compassion for self, which will show up for compassion for others. Then the work's more effective, because it includes, no one's excluded. We have to think about everyone on the earth to make this work. We can't say this group versus that group. And then, yeah, just taking good care. You know, I went and got a lot of therapy, frankly, when I hit that kind of wall. I was burned out, and I got really depressed after years of trying to, you know, do social engineering. And yeah, therapy and Buddhism helped. And then I still do activities. I didn't it's not an either or. Does any of that help, Lotus? Is there more?
I just want to say thank you. I obviously get overwhelmed when I think about it, but just touching on dealing with the fear, you definitely helped with, because I worry that if my fear gets too big, I'll abandon it, and I don't want to.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I don't think you'll abandon. I think you might need to change how you're doing it. the fear is it's there for all of us. And at the very bottom of it, I'll take a risk here, we're a little over time, but generally the biggest fear is we fear we'll die. We're fearing our death, and we're fearing the death of others. But it's like we're fearing the inevitable. So meeting with a teacher to talk about that could happen. Reading about some of the death meditations, they sound like they would drive you into the fear, but people experience that they don't, because what they do is start leading us to a sense of it's so natural and it's possible, and it's not some big horrible thing. It's just the end of this time, this form. Consciousness goes on. What we do now affects that consciousness, so we want to do good things, but I get the sense you're doing that, so. Okay, we have to end. Thank you.
Ooh, by this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good week. We have mind training on this Thursday night here from 7 to 8:30, and you're welcome as a new person or ongoing. Okay, see you soon. We also have Wednesday Chenrezig practice if you know about that and are interested. Oh my God, I'm tired. Are you? I'm not in this moment.